Well, we were looking at the effect of 3 different treatment programs for Spanish, English, bilingual, school-age children with primary language impairment, also called specific language impairment. And we were motivated to do it because this is a rapidly growing population, bilingual children, and our service providers don't have a lot of information to go on in terms of treatment for this population. So there are a lot of good reasons to look at treatment effects for this group. We looked at the effects of 3 different treatment programs. One was what we called a traditional English-only treatment. So the kind of treatment that we think a monolingual English-only clinician might be able to provide to these kids. And then we looked at a bilingual treatment where most of the treatment was conducted in Spanish, the first language for the children, with some English drawn in to help with cross-linguistic translations and mapping, and then the clinicians also used English to direct the kids in that treatment program. And then the third treatment was experimental, and it was a non-linguistic treatment that was based on trying to improve cognitive processing skills in these kids. And the reason for that treatment was we had some pilot data to show that might be effective, but that treatment was based on the premise that children who have a primary language impairment show some deficits in skills like attention and working memory and processing speed. And if it's true that those cognitive processing deficits relate to their language learning difficulties, then you might be able to improve language learning by improving the cognitive processing deficits. Moreover, in a bilingual population, you should get effects in 2 languages, right? Which is really exciting because it's so hard for us as monolingual. For most of ASHA's service providers who are monolingual English speakers, it can be a challenge to address both languages in a bilingual child. In terms of the outcomes, there's some good news and some bad news, I guess. The good news is that all 3 of those treatment programs children in all 3 of the active treatment groups made gains, particularly in their English language skills. So the positive takeaway from that, if you're a clinician, is yes, providing treatment in English to a bilingual school-age child with a language impairment will help improve their English skills. So there's some evidence for our service providers to rest on. We also found that improving cognitive processing skills had some positive effects on language, which again is evidence for some connection between those underlying cognitive processing skills and language. And then our bilingual group also made gains in English, and larger gains in English, even though more of the treatment was delivered in Spanish. So like I said, I think the most positive message is that all 3 of these treatment programs caused significant gains for the children. The less positive message is that it was very hard to get gains in Spanish or the first language for these kids. Across all 3 groups, there were much smaller gains, and the only group that made any significant change in Spanish were the kids that got direct Spanish treatment. Well, there was one Spanish measure for the cognitive processing group that showed gains, but for the most part, the gains in Spanish were much smaller, and I think it provides a picture of the challenge it is to help first language skills grow in kids that speak a minority language and are affected by a language impairment in the school years. I'm looking right now at some different aspects of cognitive processing skills in bilingual kids with language impairments, and looking a little more in depth at their attention skills to see if some of the subtle deficits that we've seen in monolingual populations show up in the bilingual kids too. And then there's a whole rapidly growing literature on some of the potential cognitive advantages to being bilingual. And we haven't looked at whether any of those cognitive advantages might extend into kids with language impairments, whether you get a bonus from trying to learn 2 languages. Because the historic assumption has been that kids who have a language impairment are very much disadvantaged in terms of becoming bilingual. Maybe they can't do it, maybe they shouldn't do it. And so the study that I'm working on right now is to look at whether they get some potential advantages from it. And hopefully that'll lead me back to another treatment study. The study we've talked about was truly a large group effort and took a lot of resources and dedicated people, and I hope to get back there because we do need more treatment studies for our clinicians and for our field.